Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. Today we have all four of our hosts on, and we also have 5 guests that are going to do a roundtable on a year in review. Where are we going with, let's take the bull by the horns and start to put something in that's a positive, that's a proactive. But let's start back around around the team here again on what is 2022, what's in store. Start with Alex.
Yes, so happy to jump in that. Great input from the others, and actually that makes me think, we must think at a higher level and on the whole global process of organization. That's what private or public. It's about security by design and privacy by design, which is a goal that we must achieve so we can reduce the impact and the likelihood of an incident. And if we face an incident, because we always face, if we think about privacy by design, that just encrypt the data, if it's stolen, we don't care. So we have, to rethink. I know it's tough because we have all the legacy systems, but with proper security architecture and isolation of the system by risk levels, and we can have, it's part of a zero trust concept, but also governance of data and risk after all. And if we build that with security in mind and privacy in mind and include that in a change management process, because you spoke about the great resignation. I don't know, we didn't touch that stuff, but when people leave, it's part of a process of the organization. They leave with knowledge and they leave also the organization with access and stuff that we must control. So these have to be by design included in the workflow. And if we do it right from a design standpoint, we need less technical controls and less capability on the little details, because it's endless. I mean, if we drill the rabbit hole on that side of things, it's endless. I mean, we can spend billions and we will never get anything efficient. So maybe it's time to rethink. And if, as we head to 2022, we saw what failed, we can learn from the mistakes. That's why I share and put the emphasis of it, and redesign accordingly. And we will not get rid of the legacy. We cannot get rid of the legacy, but what we can do is build around it, fence it, put it with risk levels, and then put the security control around this, but at a higher level, and follow this as the organization evolve, it change. We move to cloud, we move to other structure, we connect everything, but all of this must follow the guidance. And I know it looks very theoretical, but this is the way to go. Risk management through privacy and security by design. Think security and think privacy, ideally from when you design the project. But now, if it already exists, it doesn't mean that you cannot do it. From now on, in every change that you schedule, think privacy and security. And little by little, we will embed that into the culture and we will be better. So that will be my thought on what.
Yeah, Alex, I'd like to just hop on that. For a good segue, one of the things for 2020, we're seeing it in 2021, but it's being built into contract language, government side, on the commercial side. We know the number one most significant threat is human. I have for decades stated that software is number 2. It's developed by humans. Number 2. The second reason for that is it's never been built with a security mindset, back to your point, Alex. So software assurance and that goes into the development process, demonstrating for each iteration. I don't care if sprints, scrums, agile, whatever you're using for Eclipse, demonstrate that you have information, cybersecurity designed into the code. That rigor tested is becoming a requirement. It's being written into laws in contract language, which is great. But there's no specific standard. So we've got to have the ability to, I don't want to hear secure SDLC, SDLC, DevOps, DevSecOps, a mindset from the development process, not a buzzword at the beginning of a development term.
All right. Sebastian?
Thank you, sir. So, my friend used to always say that think outside the box, and we used to always reply, "What box?" You know, the problem with all these issues. I mean, Dr. Murray has said that several times. It's a human problem, right? So if it is human problem, take back and see how many problems that we have encountered in the last 50 years and how did we solve those issues? And that is one thing that comes to mind every single time we talk about every aspect of it, the mindset, the security, the privacy and everything. It's training and awareness. 7 years ago, I sat in front of a presidential panel and testified. And I said my number one agenda is to teach and learn and make people learn what is cybersecurity. I mean, you cannot force somebody to go do it unless until they understand, what the repercussions of that is or how good that is if they implement. So I always go back and say, hey, if you can't teach someone to do something, there is no way in hell that you can ever make them do something. So let that be an agenda year after year after year to make sure how the colleges, they teach the graduates. Now, a part of their curriculum should be cybersecurity. And when you come back to the companies, that should be. I mean, we teach diversity. We have diversity training because it's all mandated. Sometime, it's. I mean, a little bit of mandate is necessary, I guess. So maybe having cybersecurity mandate training mandate is also necessary. Teach people what happens. How your lives get disrupted. Put them in a situation for them to understand. Hopefully, that will change the mindset as a whole. Because the line of sight for every single individual employee is very important for the company to become successful. It's very apparent as a startup because you have only 10 employees. But it's very hard for companies like Intel or someone who have 100,000 employees. So how do you change that, right? So change management, Alex is absolutely right. Change management is so important. There are stages. I move really fast. I adapt really fast. But I had employees who took months to get to the point where Subhash, you were right. Until then, Subhash is crazy. So we have to go through that process. It's daunting. That's why I always say that technology, the solution for technology is not technology. The solution for technology is awareness in human beings.
Right, down to Daniel. What's in store for next year? Blockframe technology offers next generation blockchain managed trust and security. Unique, non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bill of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequence blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today. Contact Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com. Right, down to Daniel. What's in store for next year?
Well, I would like to see more companies start to look seriously into the industrial cybersecurity standard 62443. I would like to see people conducting more training. Just make a decision. You want it 15 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, or 2 days. Whatever is needed, it must be done, because if we spoke about ROI, training to employees has the highest possible ROI among all cyber securities. Furthermore, we will need new technologies. We will start to see, can deception technologies create something that we were not thinking about before? Because if you created a deception, you have a good chance to catch the attack much earlier then it would be just by any kind of antivirus or any kind of defense mechanism. So a lot can be done. We also need to remember the recent the Log4j vulnerability. Many people asking how it is going to affect industrial control systems. So if you have a correctly and strongly designed architecture, you are fairly safe. If you are if you have an incorrect architecture, you say, well, I need to see everything through the internet. I want my boss is on vacation. He wants to see how the production line is working. Yes, you are creating homemade risk. And this is what we will have to resolve by educating people. You need to give up something to gain cybersecurity posture.
All right, James, on to you.
Yeah, I think all those comments are really good, and I won't reiterate any of them. I think the key is about data security, right? And we see all these compliance pieces coming out, and it's very confusing for companies. We've had, as you know, 853, then 800-171. Now we're talking about CMMC, and CMMC has just gone through a rebirth from 5 to 3 levels. And CISOs and companies are really trying to make sense of this. And how do I engage? How do I become compliant? Especially, obviously, if you want to bid on government contracts. But compliance is coming full circle in every industry, whether it's a military vertical or it's a commercial vertical, and that's very taxing on companies. So getting some clarity, I think, on what their responsibility is to not only their customers or to the contract officer, if you're bidding on military or government contracts, but also downstream to their suppliers and their supply chain, right? People are trying to make sense out of that. How do I ensure that if I'm going to do this, that my downstream supply chain and my contractors are also compliant? So I think compliancy in cyber is a big issue, and it's going to continue for years to come. And we need to help companies solve that problem. And I know most of us on this panel are engaged in that regard, but it is something that companies have on their mind, and it's taxing them.
All right, Alfred, 2020.
Yeah. So I wish I had a crystal ball, but I mean, at least from what I can see, as I'm 100% that, it comes down to the people, right? And whether we set up the frameworks to be able to do that, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. Something that I've seen, at least in the past year or so, is it's a little bit of a shift. I don't want to say it's any kind of tipping point, but we have to start designating our technical people, if you will, from an IT mindset to a cyber mindset, because they're not the same, right? When we look at somebody that's in IT, it's like, hey, I got to take care of my computers. I got to make sure that software's on there. But are we really looking at that from a cyber perspective, just like Dr. Sean was saying with respect to, cyber or software isn't necessarily built with that security in mind. So I think there's a little bit of a shift with the staff from an IT to a cyber perspective. The other thing I agree with is that, the people that work in these organizations, and I look at it from an organizational piece, is that they do need more training. But I think there's some ways, because everybody's jumping from job to job every 2 or 3 years, right? So when we do invest in them, is that investment going to go away? And so I think what we can do is start automating that piece of what they can or can't do with respect to their jobs. So, can we do security education so that you're not plugging in a USB where you're not supposed to, right? Or bringing your own devices into environments. But at the same time, we limit that and we educate them, but you also have to give people the flexibility enough to be creative, to do their job and to go to the next level. Otherwise, you start losing a piece of competitiveness. So I think there's two sets of people we got to worry about in 2022. The IT to cyber shift with that piece of the team, and then your folks that are working in the organization to allow them to do their jobs in a flexible manner, but give them the space that they need to with regard to the cyber. So those are my two thoughts.
All right. So kind of we're running out of about 5 minutes left. Tim, I haven't heard from you. I want to give you the first opportunity to ask some questions here of our guest today.
Sure. I know everyone's speaking of the human part of this. I wanted to bring up the effects of AI, artificial intelligence, and that I was just recently reviewing procurement for a piece of software called Threat Modeler, where they're introducing this concept of being able to automate as much as possible, being able to, instead of I guess they got it down from 60 hours down to about 40 minutes, being able to analyze and give you some kind of roadmap for risk management, things of that nature, especially with the driven part of software and the way it's being developed today. So I guess my curiosity is there a place for IA or AI, I guess AI, artificial intelligence, and then what are some of the disadvantages and advantages using such a type of tool? So Alex, we can start with you. Sorry.
Yeah. So, it's wrongly seen as a replacement tool, whereas it's an augmentation tool. Thing is that, for the lack of resource, we can automate. But the thing is that AI stuff is only as good as the data we feed in, and the environment we're laying and the contextualization of each organization is not something that AI can really get. And I've been through that doing some assessment with automatic questionnaire. And if you see the way people answer and feed the machine, it's always a big bias. So we use these tools, but we use them with assistance, with human expertise on top of it. So we can speed up the process. We can be more efficient in the delivery, but we cannot replace us or replace the expertise and the proper decision making. And also, it's falling back to what we were speaking before: responsibility and accountability. We need responsibility contractually, and we cannot have responsibility towards AI. So, and that's a big issue. It's not only cyber. I mean, this is the whole thing, like autonomous cars and stuff. That's the big question. Who is responsible? Who is accountable? So yes, augmented, more performance, but replacing, I don't see it. Otherwise, it will lead to major issue like the hyperbolic cognitive bias that AI and machine learning generate. We will get the same exponential failure if we only rely on it without control. So that would be my take.
So Ash?
All right. So I totally agree with Alex here. I mean, more importantly, I mean, AI, it's all data driven. So it's data fed by human beings. I like AI when it is a matter of scalability, and I call that as donut making also, where if you have a process that needs to be done again and again and again fast enough, then AIs are amazingly good to do that, but at the end of the day, responsibility is very important. I agree totally with Alex, and that's where human intervention at the beginning and at the end is very, very important. But I've seen AIs. I'm in manufacturing side in the auto industry and all that, EVs and everything, and aviation, the unmanned aerial vehicles and all that. I can tell you, AI is as good as the pilots in the manned aerial vehicle, in the personal aerial vehicle. So you have to make sure the decision making is left to the human being. The AI can control where the humans can't control that fast, but at the end of the day, we have to have that human intervention. So I agree.
Yeah, it sounds like the consensus there. Daniel, what's your take on that one, sir?
Well, I tell you, people are excited about IoT, about AI, but I want to say something very carefully. According to publications, 80% of AI projects are not delivering the expected benefits.
Yeah.
However, 100% of IoT projects, the AI is increasing the cyber attack surface. So if I want to see how we are going to perform better, I said, let's look carefully when we are upgrading to Industry 4, when we are going to AI, when we are going to machine learning. Let's see how we assure that the benefits will be delivered and what kind of complementing and compensating security measures we must deploy in order to keep the attack surface not increased. This is very important in my eyes.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's concurrence across the board, definitely. Jim, you got any take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being touted as a bit of a panacea, and that's always dangerous. I mean, what you're really trying to do with AI is as other guests have said, you're trying to identify different patterns of behavior, and you're trying to automate things that will perhaps protect you. However, let's not forget the cyber criminals also know AI very well, and they deploy those techniques and those tools against any defenses that we set up. So I'll just echo what everybody else said. I mean, it really is a human issue, and I just don't think companies ought to look at tools as the way to completely protect themselves, right? Many people will say it's not about a checklist, it's about holistic security. And
Right.
I think companies need to start thinking that way, if they're not already. Many are.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Alfred, sir.
Hey, Timothy. So I don't think there's true AI yet. I always refer back to Sonny the robot on iRobot. I think that's true AI. I think we're still at the machine learning stage. And some factors to consider. Let's say this, right? I think the last time I saw, only 17% of people would get on an airplane that was a fully automated flight with no pilot.
Yeah.
So I would rhetorically ask everybody, would you get on that airplane? Right.
Right.
So let's ask those kinds of things. The other thing I think is there's a difference between what we see maybe with big data versus fat data in terms of how do we know, there has to be a man or woman in the loop that says, hey, you know what? I'm seeing that the trend's going to be that people want that product in green and red and purple. Well, how do we know that, right? How do we know what that next one's going to be? And a last point that I'll mention with respect to that is, would you truly want a weapon system that is fully AI automated?
Yeah, I think you're right. The idea, artificial intelligence, and the only way to truly, when you introduce this idea and this concept into IT or in cybersecurity is we're going to get into the battle of the AI, if you will, and then we get into the concepts. I think we're all have been hinting at, and it's Skynet, right? It goes right back to that whole scenario. We get into the pitching of it. So the other hosts
stay away from Skynet. So what do you think is in store for 2022? What are we looking at for next year?
Well, I'm going to say the uncertainty is going to be with us, but I think if you're aware of the problem, then I think that smart people are going to just be aware that this is right the environment we're in. And at least for me and my organization, the companies I work with, it comes down to really rethinking strategy and relationships. That is really the key. If you're going to be, think about it as a military unit. Uncertainty, if you are in a wartime situation, abounds. Right? It doesn't matter how good your situational awareness is. In some cases, you just cannot know what's going to happen. So what do you do to try and give your unit the best chance of mission success? Right? You plan. Right? You plan for not just a plan B, but you got a plan C, a plan D, and a plan E. You have relationships. I was talking with a friend of mine, Chris, last week, who works for a big metal distributor doing primarily nickels and titaniums for specialty industries. And he told me, he's like, with the uncertainty, right? There's that word again. He's like, in our markets, he's like, the relationships matter. He's like, do you think if I have a limited supply of, we were talking about K500 nickel, he's like, I'm going to be sure that my best customers get that. He's like, not the new guy calling me. And it just started me thinking about the value of those relationships. I mean, look at those thousands of F-250s and 350s sitting around because they don't have chips, right? Had those people been, I mean, what are the different things that could impact our supply chain? What are our backup plans? I think if people really started thinking about that, and this is especially important for the small business community, right? What are you going to do if that supplier can't follow through, right? Are you going to have a backup plan? How are you going to be flexible with your staff and relationships to be sure that when, right, the kids are at home or this happens, how can you still remain effective as an organization? So I think you can kind of take the reality of the uncertainty and then plan around it. Be like, as an organization, Chris, I have seen this for 30 years, strategic planning. We're going to do that the last week in December. It ends up being, right, a free for all for a couple hours. You didn't get anything done. You're like, well, let's revisit this in January. And then before you know it, right, it's December again, and you have all these unfinished things that you never really planned well. So I think regardless of the size of your organization, even at home, right, in personal lives, if people actually thought about this a little bit, like, what are we going to do for 2022? Like, what are some of the things that could really bite us, and how are we going to strategize around that, and how are we going to make this actually part of our culture and lifestyle, whether that's right at the Murray house or at Sean's business? What are we going to do to be sure that we're still here a year from now and we're thriving? And I think situations like this force people into that position, and the people that recognize that and actually adapt, I think those are the ones that are going to be successful in 2022. Complaining and hoping it's going to go away, or yelling at the politicians, or none of that's going to help. We have to live in the reality we've been given. Just like that military unit needs to have mission success when they're inserted into a foreign theater, when they don't know 100% of everything that's going on, right? People are still counting on them to accomplish the mission. And I think if we had kind of that mission focus, that what are we going to do to be sure my small business is in business at the end of the year, my people are employed and they're happy, right? What are we going to do to be sure that we can cover the eventualities to get the outcome we want, and live it, not just talk about it, live it.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think I'll just stop right there. I think we're going to use that to close our 2022 panel.
Thanks for sharing all your thoughts with us, Jonathan.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it wasn't too scattered or it was useful, but I believe this stuff, and I believe it'll make a difference in people's success or failure. And I think times of uncertainty, people think that their decision-making capability, sometimes it lies with other people, right? It's out of my control. I can't do it. And I think that's flawed thinking. I think it's easy to fall into that trap that these things are out of our control, when in fact, there's a lot of things that are in our control if we want to take action on them.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody that joined on today. We definitely appreciate it. And this special year in review for 2021 and what to look forward to 2022. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.
Hey, perfect.
All right. You heard it today on New Cyber Frontier. Right.
Sorry.
Edit that out.